Hi there, everyone. Welcome back to Ask the Attorney. I am Maya Engel, live in our digital studio, joined by Mary Ann Wehr once again. She's a state planning attorney for Great Lakes Center for Estate Planning here in Northern Michigan. Happy Leap Day, everyone. And of course, we have an extra guest here tonight. So, Mary Ann, do you want to introduce Michele?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm so thankful that Michele joined us on our live stream today as our guest. This really introduces a very advanced topic in estate planning, and it has to do with caring for your special needs person in your family, which can be daunting during life. But when you think about what needs to occur after the death of a caregiver, Michele is so well versed. She's recognized nationally as being a top lawyer in this area. And I'm not going to waste a lot of the time because I think, Michele, you have so much to share tonight. So without putting you on the spot, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and
Sure.
give us a little information.
Well, thanks, Mary Ann. I'm really delighted to be here and to share anything that might help families who are dealing with, a loved one or planning or thinking about planning or, I need to get to it. I know that, just a little bit about me is that I founded the Michigan Law Center in 2010, and I've been in private practice for over 25 years. I'm an attorney, but I'm also a mom of 4 kids, and one of them has disabilities. And so oddly enough, I did this work before my daughter came around, which was really helpful to help identify that she had autism and resources to help get her some assistance. And so now she's a resident of the state of California and lives independently with support. And so she's living her best life, which is awesome. And that's what everybody wants to hear, right? That is dealing with this, that has a child with disabilities. And I think whether your child is mildly impacted or profoundly impacted, I think that the hopes and dreams that we have for our children remain the same, which is that they are happy, reach their potential, they're safe, and are loved, right? And so that is the essence of what a special needs plan does, right? We want that for all of our children, but for children that have special needs, it takes a little more effort, more planning, more structure. And so that's what I've been doing the past 25 years. And that's really the focus of my practice. You can check out more information on MichiganLawCenter.com, but otherwise, I think that's my passion. That's what I love doing every day. I know, Mary Ann, you and I talk to a lot of lawyers, and most of them are pretty miserable. They don't like what they do.
We're good.
Not you and I. And thankfully, we love what we do. Not everybody has a great day every day, but when your life is filled with purpose and service, then I think that checks a lot of boxes. So that's why I'm here.
That's so awesome, Michele. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are so lucky to have you. And so this is pretty informal. I'll ask you a few questions, but we're going to stop at any point if any of our viewers have any questions. So this is a good time to remind all you folks at home watching that at any point in this live stream, if you have any questions at all for Michele or Mary Ann, be sure to leave a comment. And like I mentioned, we will stop our conversation and answer your questions. Of course, this segment is called Ask the Attorney. So we do need some questions to ask the attorney. But with that being said, at this point, we don't have any questions yet. So if Michele, Mary Ann, if you're ready, we can hop right into the first question.
Sounds
Absolutely.
great.
Okay, so a lot of my questions probably will be directed to you, Michele, but Mary Ann, of course, at any point, if you want to jump in, please feel free to do so. So first of all, what are the key benefits of supplemental needs planning for individuals with disabilities or special needs?
Well, I think that special needs planning or supplemental needs planning, people often ask, like, well, what does that even mean? It means, when you're looking at what you need to take care of and how your child is going to, or your loved one, sometimes it's not just your child, it could be a sibling or someone else in your family. It's what do I need to make sure is in place if something happens to me, whoever their key advocate is. Sometimes it's the person with disabilities themselves who acquired a disability later in life, saying, how do I get care? How do I get everything I need? How do I preserve government benefits that I might need in order to help take care of what I need to do? So special needs planning could be, different aspects. Most of the time when either Mary Ann or I are working on a case, it has to do with parents who are planning for a loved one. And often I think one of the biggest mistakes is that parents wait too long. It's never too late, but it's never too early to start planning. Because if there's one thing that we learned about COVID is that all we know is that things change, to expect the unexpected. And so when you are dealing with a loved one with special needs, really the earlier you start planning, the better the plan becomes, because this isn't something that you can just set and forget. It's something that you have to look at over time. But one of the key benefits of doing this planning in advance is that you're looking at developing a framework of checks and balances, because quite often we're dealing with someone who cannot advocate for themselves necessarily. Banking or more sophisticated planning or investments are challenging. And if you leave these to be unregulated, where no one's looking out for this person with disabilities, you're leaving a lot to chance. And I know Mary Ann and I have had a lot of discussions about this and how you create that. It's like, okay, is there a professional trustee or is it family? Should it be family, right? So let's look at creating, what do those checks and balances look like? And can we make it cost effective, which is of course a huge consideration. One of the other things that we're concerned about with special needs planning is protection from creditors and predators, right? We don't want someone, credit card companies coming after any of these assets, or an ex-spouse, right, having access to this, or anyone that might come into our child's lives when we're not here to make sure that they're safe and protected. And so that's a big safeguard that we can help put in place. And one of the most important reasons, but not the most important reason, the most important reason is that the purpose of the trust is there to help enhance that person's life. But one of the primary methods that we do is make sure that the Special Needs Trust preserves government program eligibility. So the world of public benefits is a complicated one, and it's often the intersection of federal benefits like Social Security or Medicare, along with state benefits that could be anything, or private health insurance. It could be pensions, IRA benefits, or 401k, and making sure that all of those things that we can tap into are balanced. Where we try to achieve a balance between public benefits like Medicaid, right, and private dollars that might be in the form of assets that are left to someone in a trust. So what that really looks like in real life is that if your child can't live alone without support, who pays for that, right? Well, usually it's Medicaid, and there might be an asset limit. And so you say the person could only have $2,000 in their name. Everything else that you want to leave them really has to be in a special needs trust. And so we all recognize that government benefits don't pay for everything that someone might need to not just survive, but thrive in life. And so that's where that special needs trust can help supplement. So that's where sometimes it's referred to as a special needs trust or supplemental needs trust. They have some different names. So I tend to name trust very plainly so people recognize exactly what it is. But I've seen things from Castle Trust to Bubblegum Trust to Amenities Trust. It all really means the same thing. I try not to be too creative or tricky when it comes to naming what these trusts are, because these are being looked at by government agencies and courts, as well as other maybe professional advocates. And I don't want to be too cute when it comes to that. I want them to know exactly what it is that they're looking at.
Mm-hmm. And of course, these past 10 segments, we have talked all about estate planning with Mary Ann. So Michele, how does supplemental needs planning differ from traditional estate planning? And why is it important for families with dependents with disabilities?
That's a great question. So when I'm working with Mary Ann or an attorney that does a lot of estate planning in their practice, one thing I love about Mary Ann is that she recognizes that she's really, really good at the estate planning piece. But she recognizes that, there's this other layer of deep knowledge that's required. And so that's where we play well together in the same sandbox, where we coordinate. She concentrates on the family, on the mom and dad, and then I can concentrate on the person with disabilities. And so, yes, those things are separate and they should be treated separately in an estate plan, because the estate plan that Mary Ann would draft for her mom and dad is about them, right? It's about, we're looking at tax issues, right? IRAs, and what happens with one spouse when the other passes away. We're looking at a smooth transition of wealth between from generation A to generation B, possibly even a third generation like grandchildren. And most importantly, we want to avoid probate. We want to keep those costs down. And that's part of that smooth transition. With special needs planning, it's about a lifelong framework for support. And so completely different objective. And so that's where we're working in, and the plan that we create is really focused on that person with disabilities. And so when you create that special needs trust, it's all about that person. Mary Ann concentrates on mom and dad. I concentrate on their child. And so that's where that is a completely different objective. And that's why I really advocate that they should be separate trusts, not necessarily separate attorneys, but that's why I love working with Mary Ann, because we work really well together. She concentrates on mom and dad, and we have a separation of what the objectives are, and we coordinate very well.
We do. We absolutely do. And special needs planning is a very niche area. In that area where in my estate planning, I don't spend a lot of time in Social Security regs. You live them. Right? And so, or there are certainly some IRS regulations that I'm not I have to be a bit attuned to them, but not to the detail that you are with supplemental needs or special needs planning. So for me, I think by this time in our live streams, we all know I am really all about the whole family making the right decisions, and I'm very passionate about it working well for the family. And so part of finding Michele was like, this glorious moment where I felt like I could now do really well with families with special needs children, because I'm never one to just play on the edges. So,
and that's a sign of a really good lawyer, I think, is that knowing what your lane is and playing well with others. And that rather than being looked at as a negative, I've always enjoyed working with people that recognize like what their strengths are and where they need additional expertise. And I do that myself. Like I don't do my own financial planning, right? I don't do my own tax returns. I don't do high net worth tax planning. I just have this one little niche that I have a deep knowledge on. And that's where I think as a consumer, so for people who are watching this or listening to this, you should be wary and leery of an attorney that says they do it all.
I agree. I feel like I'm probably could put together a decent trust, but it's all of the pieces around it, right? It's helping the trustee know what that family wants for their loved one. It's helping the loved one become independent or know their resources. So there's just so much more in my mind. And I think that's what I like about you is you have those pieces, right? So I could put a trust together, probably be a pretty decent trust. But all of the other pieces around it too, I'm just not playing with it every day. Right?
And I think you bring up a really good point, and that's it's not just about the document, because I agree with you, Mary Ann. You would put together a very fine trust, but particularly with special needs planning and special needs estate planning, I think you hit it on the head. It's about way more than just the document. It's about where's the family today and how well are they functioning? Because whatever isn't working for you now surely is not going to work for anybody who comes after you. And so pulling together those resources, and that's where it does take time. It evolves over time. So if your objective is to have your child living independently with support in their own house, it takes years to get there. Some trial and error. From support plans, special needs plans, how much money do you need? I get asked that a lot. And I think that's where, Mary Ann, you have a really good perspective of balancing out for the entire family, what's fair versus what's right, and coming up with some creative ways to make sure that that child who has disabilities, who maybe can't have their own earnings, they cannot work to support themselves, are they left with enough to actually meet the parents' goals or their own goals, and how to create additional funds. And that's where that balance comes in. So it is very different.
It is. Yep. It is very different.
So then going off of that, Michele, can you outline some common strategies or tools used in supplemental needs planning to ensure financial security and access to resources for individuals with disabilities?
Sure. There's some, I talked about this just a little bit ago, which is that one of the biggest things that I see that I don't care for is a trust within a trust. I like having a separate standalone trust for a child with special needs. And there's a few reasons for this. Is most of the time when I see a special needs trust, it's a paragraph or two within the parent's revocable living trust. The problem with that is a few. One is that all the rules of the trust are for the parents, right? It's about their administration and their trust and what they want in their lives. So when you're dealing with the rules that regard, for that person with disabilities, it's like this much of the trust. Now, why is that an issue? Well, because when you go through and you're asking questions, or answering questions as a consumer, right? You're the client and the lawyer's asking you a bunch of questions about who's going to administer your trust when you're gone. Well, the person that you would want administering your trust, what is their objective? What is their goal, right? Usually it's liquidating and dispersing the money, right? With a special needs trust, that's not the case. So for parents, the job of that trustee is probably very short, whereas the job of a special needs trustee is for life. So it's a completely different purpose. But the rules about that, when you're drafting these trusts, and if it's a trust within the parent's trust, you're not asking those questions. There's really no ability to, if you're going to put all of that into that trust, might as well be a standalone, a separate trust, so that all the rules about who the trustee is, how the trust works, how the trust is administered, all is about that special needs trust. Right now, you can have a legally sufficient special needs trust in about 3 sentences, but legally sufficient and actually something that works well for the person are 2 different things. And so that's one of the big things that I see, is that it really should be its own standalone trust. The other big consideration there is that some of the checks and balances that I mentioned earlier, where maybe you'd have a professional trustee or a trustee, and then you'd have an advisory committee. There's really no place to do that, or space to do that, or appropriate way to do that in a parent's revocable living trust, where it's kind of a trust within a trust. It just doesn't work well from a drafting or administrative perspective. The other thing about having a standalone trust is that it allows other family members to contribute. So if you have like a grandma, right, grandparents, or you have siblings, where I've seen this a number of times, where we have a gap in age and you've got some older siblings that are very successful and want to, or other family members, aunts, uncles, anybody that wants to distribute money to or leave money to a family member with disabilities, having a standalone trust gives them a way to do it, and already has that framework in place. And so I love doing it in that particular way. And that's not necessarily popular, but that's what I find works really best. It's also great when you are looking to administer it. So something happened, mom and dad are gone, and you're looking at, okay, what do I do now, right? And it starts with, if it's a separate trust, it becomes so much cleaner and easier, where it's like pouring cream into your coffee, right? Mom and dad's trust makes a distribution, and they do their job, they complete their job, they liquidate the assets, they gather them, and they are ready to write out a check. Who do they write it to? The trustee of their sibling, usually their sibling's special needs trust. And then mom and dad's trust gets wrapped up and it's closed and their job is done, right? So it makes it very clean and very easy. If it's a trust within a trust, it gets hard even just thinking about, okay, what's the title? How do I own this account? What do I name it? It gets very confusing just from the get-go. And we want to avoid confusion, complexity. We want to make things as simple and clean and easy as possible, because it's a very difficult time. People are grieving on top of all this and trying to figure out paperwork. Ugh.
It's crazy.
Much. It's
too much. Yeah. The other thing that, a standalone trust allows, at some point, a family is going to have to turn over the revocable living trust or the standalone trust to the financial advisors, possibly the Health and Human Services, other various regulatory departments. If they can just see the standalone trust, they understand it. If they have to dig through the revocable living trust, it's more difficult. But what I would say is, in the trust in the revocable living trust that I do have a section in them that, because you don't know the condition of your beneficiary at your death. So I do have a section that says, if one of your beneficiaries is found to have special needs, whatever the magic words are that I put in there, then they need a special needs trust, similar to the following, or, but certainly making sure that they don't inherit, someone with a disability doesn't inherit directly. So, that's where, for me, a special needs trust language in a revocable living trust makes sense.
I agree, Mary Ann. That's a great safety net, because sometimes people establish a revocable living trust or do their estate plan, and then 20 years goes by and they haven't looked at it again. And so I think that's a great safety net provision. And I think that's just really good, competent, experienced estate planning drafting that you're hearing about right now, is that we always plan for the what ifs, right? And that's a fantastic way to protect people. If they do their estate plan and don't look at it for 10, 20 years, we don't recommend that, but it does happen.
Yeah.
And so you put in all the bells and whistles that you can.
Yep, exactly.
And Michele, can you talk about some of the potential pitfalls or challenges that families might encounter if they don't engage in a supplemental needs planning for their loved one with disabilities?
Sure. Absolutely. Well, one of the first things that comes to mind is that there could be a critical loss of benefits. So a lot of people confuse different streams of benefits, different types. And one of the most confusing things is the difference between Medicaid and Medicare. And the government helpfully, named these two programs extremely similarly. They're very hard to tell them apart. But Medicare is what you get once you become, retired, and it takes care of you. It's like health insurance. So think of like hospitals, doctor visits. It's like Blue Cross Blue Shield, right? That's Medicare. It takes care of you. Medicaid, think care aid or a healthcare aid, where somebody comes in to help take care of you in that way. It's not skilled care, not something a doctor would do, or a nurse or an occupational therapist. Medicaid is one of the only resources for in-home and nursing home care. And so, or it could take the place in a group home. And so quite often it's making sure that as many buckets of resources are maintained for an individual with disability so that they can be as independent as possible. And so Medicaid, unfortunately, is one of the only resources, especially in Michigan, that we have to help support in-home health services. And so that's where, if you don't do proper planning, that will go away unless it's properly protected in a special needs trust. And there's an important distinction that if parents don't do this planning ahead of time, and people either, don't properly fund their trust, which I know Mary Ann has talked about, right? And that's where you're integrating assets into your trust. If they don't do that, then what happens is that you're stuck with what's called first party special needs trusts. And those are a completely different type of trust than what you would do in an estate planning forum. And why? Because if somebody has to do planning, now the money belongs to the person with disabilities. What happens when they pass away is that the state of Michigan now becomes the primary beneficiary of their estate. And that is totally avoidable if the parents do the planning ahead of time. And we see this, Mary Ann and I both see this quite often, where parents either forget or they just don't do the planning. And of course they're busy, not just busy, but sometimes overwhelmed. And so They just are always kind of chasing or responding to emergency after emergency. So we're all human beings, right? And sometimes we just, on any given day, we do the best we can. But that's why the planning is so important ahead of time, because we want to make sure that if anything is left over, it goes to the rest of the family. It goes back to the family, not the state of Michigan.
Right.
So that's something. The other mistake that I see is really not shopping for the right lawyer with the right amount of experience. Again, that's why I love working with Mary Ann in particular. She knows when to collaborate and loves bringing additional. She creates the team, right? And that's often what it takes, is creating that team. If you go to a lawyer where they do everything, if you have a special, you don't go to your general practitioner, your doctor, if you have brain cancer, right? That might be where you start, but that's not where you stay. You go to a specialist because you have a special issue that needs attention. And that's where, again, Mary Ann's great about assembling that team of professionals to help a client that has a particular need, whether it's tax issues or special needs issues, government benefit issues. And that's the sign, I think, of a great lawyer. The other thing is selection of trustee. So let's say you're going through and you're doing the planning. And I've talked about the importance of creating those checks and balances, that team. This area is particularly complex. And you make a bad check, you make out of distribution, and you pay for the whatever the thing is the wrong way, you could compromise benefits. And so quite often what you're asking a family member to do really should be done by a professional, because this isn't just something that you're wrapping up the affairs and you're issuing some checks, which is a gross understatement of what being a trustee is, but that is in its simplest form what your objective is. And there's a natural end to it. It takes maybe a year or two, but you're done. With a special needs trust, this is for life. And so there are Social Security benefits to manage. There are Medicaid or other benefits to manage, housing, staffing, and not just writing out checks and making sure the investments are making money, taxes. All of these things are rolled into and always evolve and change. And so I find that the best balance is a professional trustee with a lot of experience doing special needs trust administration in particular, and then having the family be the advisors to the trustee. One, to make sure that the trustee is doing a good job. This is a very personal request, a very personal job that we are asking someone to do. And so we want to make sure that they not just know what they're doing, but they have a good relationship with the beneficiary. Sometimes when mental health issues are involved or addiction issues are involved, having that buffer, that professional, can save the relationship between the family members, right? And so that's something that we don't often think about. And yes, there is a cost to having a professional, right? Which may or may not be possible, just depends on the situation. But that's where a good experienced estate planner will offer up some suggestions and options that are suitable to that particular family's needs. The other issue is, Mary Ann, maybe you could talk about this. And sometimes parents want to naturally either restrict how much is going into the special needs trust or being left to the person with disabilities, or they want to make too big a share or at least it's perceived as being too big a share by the other beneficiaries. So maybe you could talk about how you talk to families about that.
Absolutely. It's a very tough balance for some families, right? It's a hard decision. You have just so much funds. You don't want the other child or children to feel left out or diminished in any way. So when I talk to a family with special needs, I talk to them in the way of maybe if they have property and then they have money, maybe I'll talk about the property going to the people without special needs, but to focus on recognizing that the money that you're going to be providing to your child or your sibling is the only source of income they will have for their life. So it's the only thing, aside from a very small, maybe SSI payment, which is very small, that's the only thing that's going to give them additional qualities to their life. Take them to the movie, maybe buy them nice clothes, provide some transportation, those other things, even dental work. So So I really talk to the parents about focusing on making sure that the supplemental needs or the special needs person has enough, recognizing the trajectory of their life. So like you said, I build a team. We collaborate with financial advisors, with CPAs, with where the trust can go, and trustees, future trustees. And I really, if I pressure at all, and it's always the choice of the parents, but if I pressure at all, I want them to lean a bit towards the special needs person, because they have, they've always had mom and dad in their life and their family. And in the future, they're going to still have their family, but they won't have that support of mom and dad without having some money in the trust. And that's how I talk to them, to help them understand. I understand why it's a struggle for you, but I think it would be okay, with the others in your family who also love your special needs person.
Mm-hmm. And if they come to you early enough in their life cycle, like in the where they are in life in general, there are other ways to help create that balance without taking away from the other children. Because, as parents, we always want to be fair. What we do for one, we do for all. But recognizing, as you said, Mary Ann, is that there's difficulties. If one child cannot earn money to support themselves, then it's appropriate to supplement. And one of the best ways you can do that is with life insurance. Yeah. And where you give a supplement, an amount over and above what you would give maybe in an equal share to the child with special needs, that doesn't take away from the other children. But you have to do that earlier on when it makes it really affordable. If you wait until you're 70 years old, then it makes it very difficult to be able to afford something like that. But that's why, again, estate planning isn't a one and done. It's something that you should really look at every few years.
Yep. Right. Yep. Over the course of your lifetime. And I really advocate building a relationship with your lawyer, just like you have a relationship with a financial advisor, and just like you have a relationship with your CPA or your doctor. And it's just a relationship to help you stay on course when something changes in your life. So that's why I advocate. Now, there was a time where I think estate planning was done, stuck on a shelf, and that was it. But that is not where we are today. That's not state of the art. So
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Well, ladies, I know both of you could continue this conversation all night probably, but we are out of time. So Michele, I want to thank you again so much for joining us today and for touching on such an important topic. And I'm going to leave a link in the comments just for an additional resource for families out there. And Michele, I'm also wondering if you want to put your contact information in the comments. So if anyone does want to reach out to you, they can do that. I also have Mary Ann's contact information in the description of this post. So anything else that you ladies want to say before we do wrap it up?
I just want to thank Mary Ann and you, Maya, for having me here. It's always a delight to share this information with people that need it, which I don't think that there's enough out there. So the link is to the NOLA Press book, Securing Your Child's Financial Future. And it's a way to give a parent a really good overview about special needs planning for their loved one and where they should start. I co-authored this years ago with my husband, Kevin Urbach, and so it's him and his associate that did the most recent couple editions. So it's a great place to start and get some information over and above just Google's your friend, right? But the Academy of Special Needs Planners also has a consumer portion of their website that is also very helpful and more national in scope if you don't live in Michigan.
Great.
So Maya, a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about lawyers collaborating with one another, and you were kind of surprised by that?
Yeah, perfect example right here.
And here it is.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, ladies. Well, thank you both so much for once again taking some time to talk with us today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evenings. Mary Ann, I will see you again in a couple of weeks. And Michele, maybe we'll see you on here again in another Ask the Attorney segment in the future.
I would love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michele.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.